The emergency lights flashed red across the council chamber as Admiral Zethkar of the Corvani Defense Fleet stood before the assembled representatives. His normally pristine blue uniform was torn and stained with the purple blood of his fallen crew members. Behind him, holographic displays showed the terrible truth that had brought the galaxy to its knees. "Another star system is gone," he announced, his voice barely steady. "The Helix Nebula colonies. All 7 worlds, 17 billion souls consumed in less than 6 hours. The chamber fell silent except for the soft clicking of the Arthrani delegates' mandibles and the low rumbling from the Uthak representatives' breathing apparatus. Each species sat in their designated areas, but today the usual political divisions meant nothing. Fear had united them in a way that centuries of diplomacy never could. On the main display, the tactical map of known space looked like a diseased organ. Red zones marked the areas where the void swarm had already passed, leaving behind nothing but cold, empty space. The expanding crimson stain had consumed 3 member worlds in the past 6 months, and the rate of expansion was increasing. "Tell us about their ships," demanded Senator Lyriel of the Etherian Republic, her translucent skin flickering with nervous patterns of light. "Surely our combined fleets can—" "There are no ships," Admiral Zethkar interrupted. "Not as we understand them. The swarm entities are living vessels, each one the size of a dreadnought but capable of adapting to any weapon we use against them. When we fire plasma cannons, they develop plasma-resistant shells. When we use kinetic projectiles, they grow armor that deflects the rounds. They learn from every encounter and share that knowledge instantly with the entire swarm." The Graxian delegate, a massive creature with rocky skin, shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair. "Our ancestors spoke of the Devourers in their oldest legends. We thought they were myths, stories told to frighten younglings, but the descriptions match perfectly. How long do we have?" This question came from Chancellor Marin of the Astari Collective. Her golden feathers dulled with worry. Admiral Zethkar checked his datapad. "Based on current expansion rates, the swarm will reach the core worlds in 8 standard months. The outer colonies have perhaps 4 months, maybe less. Our evacuation efforts are proceeding, but where can we evacuate to? The swarm shows no sign of stopping, no interest in negotiation. They consume everything. Planets, moons, asteroid belts, even the stars themselves." The chamber erupted in panicked discussions as representatives shouted questions and demands in a dozen different languages. The translation systems struggled to keep up, creating a cacophony of electronic voices overlapping each other. Chancellor Marin struck her ceremonial gong 3 times, calling for order. "What about the forbidden sectors?" asked Delegate Than of the Mystic Confederacy, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "Surely some of the quarantined species might—" "Absolutely not," Senator Lyriel snapped. "The quarantine zones exist for good reason. The species contained there are dangerous, unpredictable. The Veltar would consume us from within. The Nixari would enslave our minds, and the humans—" She shuddered visibly. "What about the humans?" Admiral Zethkar asked quietly. The chamber fell silent again. Even the air recycling systems seemed to quiet down, as if the station itself was holding its breath. "The humans were quarantined for our protection," Chancellor Marin said slowly. "When we first made contact with them 200 years ago, they seemed primitive. But their psychology, their capacity for violence, and their fascination with conflict was unlike anything we had encountered. They create weapons not just for defense, but for entertainment. They tell stories about monsters and celebrate fear as a form of art. They asked to join the council," Senator Lyriel continued. "They offered to share their military technology. But when our scientists examined their weapons, we discovered they had designed tools of war that violated every principle of civilized combat. Weapons meant to cause suffering rather than quick death. Ships designed to inspire terror rather than simply destroy enemies. We voted unanimously to place them in quarantine." "They accepted the decision peacefully," admitted Chancellor Marin. "Perhaps too peacefully. They simply smiled and returned to their space, and we heard nothing from them for decades. But our long-range scouts reported strange activities. Massive construction projects, ships unlike anything in our databases. And always they were building more weapons." The Graxian delegate leaned forward. "What kind of weapons?" "The kind that gave our military advisors nightmares," Admiral Zethkar said grimly. "Biological weapons that could rewrite genetic codes in real time. AI systems modeled after predators from their home world, and something they called psychological warfare. the deliberate use of fear and madness as tactical tools. But that was 200 years ago, Delegate Than pointed out. What could they have developed in isolation since then? Nobody wanted to answer that question. The strategic displays continued their grim update cycle, showing new swarm incursions every few minutes. The red zones were spreading like blood and water, consuming everything in their path. In the past hour alone, 3 more mining stations had gone dark. "We have tried everything," Admiral Zethkar said finally. "Our best tacticians, our most advanced weapons, our most powerful fleets. Nothing slows them down. If anything, our resistance makes them stronger. They adapt to every strategy, counter every weapon, consume every defense." Chancellor Marin stood up, her golden feathers now completely gray with stress. "Then we have no choice. We must send the signal." "To whom?" Senator Lyriel demanded. "To everyone, every species, every civilization, every intelligence we have ever detected. We will broadcast on all frequencies in every language we know. We will beg for help from anyone willing to give it." "Including the quarantined species?" "Including them." The vote was swift and unanimous. Within the hour, the most powerful transmitters in the galaxy were broadcasting a simple message in over 300 languages. "This is the Galactic Council. We face extinction from an unknown force. Any civilization receiving this message, please help us. We offer anything in exchange for aid against the Void Swarm. Please, if you can hear this, help us." The message was sent to every corner of known space, including the forbidden sectors that had been sealed off for centuries. Most civilizations would ignore it, knowing that the swarm was too dangerous to fight. Others lacked the technology to make a difference. But in one particular quarantined sector, marked with warnings in dozens of languages and surrounded by automated defense platforms, something very different happened. The message reached Earth at 1427 GMT on a Tuesday. It was received by Deep Space Communications Array 7, processed by the Military Communications AI, and forwarded to Fleet Command within 8 minutes. Admiral Sarah Chen was reviewing weapons testing reports when her aide brought her the transmission. She read it twice, then looked up with the kind of smile that had made enemy negotiators request transfers to safer assignments. "Sir?" her aide asked nervously. Admiral Chen reached for her secure communication device. "Get me the Joint Chiefs," she said. "Tell them it's time to let the monsters out." The galaxy had begged for help. They were about to discover that some prayers are answered in ways you never expect. The meeting room 3 kilometers beneath Cheyenne Mountain had no windows, no decorations, and no comfortable chairs. The walls were lined with screens showing classified military projects that existed only in rumors and nightmare scenarios. Around the massive steel table sat 12 of the most dangerous human beings ever born, though some of them could barely be called human anymore. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the head of the table, her left arm replaced with military-grade cybernetics after the Titan Wars. The mechanical limb moved with precise, inhuman grace as she activated the holographic display. "Ladies and gentlemen, the galaxy is ending, and they want our help." The recording of the Council's desperate plea played in the original Corvani, followed by translations in 17 human languages. When it finished, the room remained silent for exactly 37 seconds. General Marcus Rodriguez was the first to speak. The man they called Reaper had more machine parts than biological ones after volunteering for every experimental enhancement program in human history. His voice came through vocal cords that had been replaced with synthetic versions designed to remain calm, even while experiencing fatal injuries. "How long since they quarantined us?" he asked, his glowing red eyes reflecting data streams from his neural implants. 212 years, 4 months, 18 days, replied Dr. Elena Vasquez, without looking up from her tablet. The small woman appeared harmless except for the biohazard warnings tattooed along her arms, and the fact that 3 different human governments had banned her from entering their systems. "I've been keeping track." Admiral Chen smiled, and several of the younger officers unconsciously leaned away from her. "They called us monsters, remember? Said our weapons were too cruel, our tactics too frightening. They locked us away because we enjoyed war too much and asked too many questions about fear." Colonel James Ghost Patterson materialized in the chair beside her, his personal cloaking device shutting down with a soft hum. Nobody was surprised by his sudden appearance. Ghost had a habit of entering meetings through methods that violated several laws of physics. "I took the liberty of reviewing their tactical data," he said, producing a data chip from thin air. "The Void Swarm is impressive. Adaptive biomechanical entities, collective intelligence, complete resource consumption. But they have one critical weakness, which is, Admiral Chen asked. They're not insane enough. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her tablet with genuine interest. Explain. Ghost activated his own holographic display, showing swarm tactical patterns. They adapt to conventional weapons and standard tactics because their programming expects logical responses. But their adaptive algorithms break down when faced with deliberately irrational behavior. They can't adapt to crazy because crazy doesn't follow patterns. General Rodriguez's mechanical fingers drummed against the table. We've had 2 centuries to develop new weapons without council oversight. What do we have that's sufficiently insane? Admiral Chen gestured to the screens around the room. Project Nightmare. Ships designed to broadcast fear-inducing frequencies that cause panic in carbon-based life forms. Project Wendigo. Biological weapons that rewrite enemy genetic codes to make them hunt their own kind. Project Reaper. AI systems modeled after human serial killers and given control of weapon systems. Don't forget Project Hydra, added Dr. Vasquez with disturbing enthusiasm. Self-replicating nanoweapons that become more aggressive the more they're destroyed. Or Project Banshee. Soldiers who've been psychologically conditioned to find pleasure in their own deaths during combat. Commander Lisa Siren Walsh spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the subtle harmonics that made most people want to trust her completely. She was the product of Project Mockingbird, a psychological warfare specialist who could convince enemy leaders to surrender by making them believe their own thoughts were betraying them. The question is whether we want to help them at all. They abandoned us when we needed allies. They called us monsters and locked us away. They did, Admiral Chen agreed. But now they're desperate enough to beg those same monsters for help. That changes the dynamic significantly. General Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, servo motors whirring softly. What's our objective here? Save the galaxy? Prove our worth? Get revenge? All of the above, Admiral Chen said. But remember, we're not just fighting the Void Swarm. We're also showing the galaxy what happens when you quarantine the wrong species for the wrong reasons. Dr. Vasquez was already taking notes. I'll need access to swarm biological samples for my weapons to be effective. How do we get them? We let them attack us, Commander Walsh suggested. Let them think they're winning. Collect samples while they try to adapt to our first-wave weapons, then deploy the real arsenal once we understand their biology. Ghost nodded approvingly. Excellent strategy. We use ourselves as bait while gathering intelligence. The casualties will be acceptable if we select volunteers from the Banshee project. The casual discussion of using human soldiers as disposable test subjects would have horrified the council. But everyone in the room had volunteered for projects that made such calculations routine. They were no longer quite human, and they all knew it. Admiral Chen activated another display showing human fleet positions. We have advantages the council species lack. Our ships don't just carry weapons. They carry psychological warfare systems. We don't just fight to win a row. We fight to break our enemy's will to continue fighting. The Dante-class dreadnoughts are ready, reported General Rodriguez. Each one broadcasts subsonic frequencies designed to induce existential dread in organic minds. The Lovecraft-class cruisers carry reality distortion fields that make enemy crews question their own sanity. And the Poe-class destroyers are designed to make enemies afraid of the dark, Admiral Chen finished. Perfect for fighting creatures that consume light itself. Dr. Vasquez held up a sealed container that seemed to writhe with its own life. I have biological agents that turn adaptation against itself. The more an organism tries to evolve defenses, the more aggressively the weapon attacks those new defenses. It's like an immune system that declares war on its own body. Commander Walsh was studying personnel files on her tablet. I have 3,000 volunteers from the psychological warfare programs ready for deployment. They've been conditioned to find joy in impossible situations and to laugh at their own deaths. Perfect for fighting an enemy that feeds on fear and despair. Ghost had been quiet for several minutes, which usually meant he was planning something particularly disturbing. I suggest we accept their plea for help, he said finally. But we do it our way, with our weapons, using our tactics. And when the galaxy sees what we've become in isolation, they'll realize that quarantining us was the worst mistake they ever made. Admiral Chen looked around the table at her collection of monsters, madmen and military scientists who had long ago abandoned the concepts of ethical warfare. Are we agreed? We help the galaxy, but we do it as ourselves, or not as the sanitized. civilized version they wanted us to become. The vote was unanimous. Within 6 hours, orders went out to every human military installation in known space. Project files marked "Never deploy under any circumstances" were suddenly reclassified as "Authorized for immediate use weapons" that had been deemed too cruel for human conflicts were loaded onto ships designed to fight wars that couldn't be won through conventional means. The fleet that assembled at Staging Area Omega would have given Council tacticians nightmares. 67 ships of various sizes, each one a masterpiece of applied horror. Their hulls were painted matte black and inscribed with warnings in languages that hadn't been spoken on Earth for millennia. Their weapon systems had names like Despair Cannon and Sanity Shredder. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the DNS Wendigo, and watched her fleet prepare for departure. Every ship was crewed by volunteers who had specifically requested assignment to missions with 0 expected survival rates. Some were still recognizably human. Others had modified themselves so extensively that they qualified as new species. The bridge crew worked in perfect silence, their faces showing the calm expressions of people who had made peace with madness long ago. The ship's AI spoke with the voice of a 20th century serial killer, cheerfully announcing system readiness in tones that suggested it was planning something unspeakable. "All ships report ready." "Admiral," reported her tactical officer, a woman whose eyes had been replaced with targeting systems that allowed her to calculate the precise amount of terror needed to break an enemy's morale. Admiral Chen activated the fleet communication system. "Ladies and gentlemen, the galaxy that abandoned us is now begging for our help. They called us monsters and locked us away because they couldn't understand that sometimes monsters are exactly what you need. Today we proved that they were right to fear USIO and wrong to leave us alone." The fleet entered hyperspace 12 minutes later, bound for the first confirmed swarm incursion. Behind them, Earth's automated defense system sealed the quarantine zone and began broadcasting a simple message to any approaching vessels. "Warning: this sector contains humans. Approach at your own risk." The galaxy had begged for help from their monsters. Now they were about to discover what 2 centuries of unrestricted military development had created in the darkness. Between the stars, the Corvani homeworld of Tekval had been under siege for 48 hours when the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Admiral Zethkar, commanding the last functional defense platform, watched his tactical display with growing disbelief as 67 black ships materialized in perfect formation. "Are those the humans?" asked his communications officer, her voice tight with strain. Below them, the planet's surface glowed with the hellish light of swarm consumption, as biomechanical entities the size of cities slowly devoured everything they touched. According to the identification codes. "Yes," Admiral Zethkar replied. "But those ships, they're not in our databases. They don't match any known human designs. The human fleet was unlike anything in Council records. The ships seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their hulls painted in a black so deep it hurt to look at directly. Strange symbols covered their surfaces, or markings that seemed to shift and writhe when observed through optical sensors. Most disturbing were the sounds coming from the human communication channels. Low, subsonic harmonics that made the Corvani crew feel inexplicably anxious. "Incoming transmission from the human flagship," reported the communications officer. "Put it through." The face that appeared on the main screen belonged to Admiral Sarah Chen, though Admiral Zethkar immediately noticed the mechanical components integrated into her skull and the predatory smile that showed teeth filed to sharp points. "Admiral Zethkar, this is Admiral Chen of the Human Defense Corps. We received your distress call." "Admiral Chen, thank the ancestors you're here," Admiral Zethkar said, his relief evident. "The swarm entities have consumed 60% of our planet's surface. Our weapons have no effect on them, eh? They adapt too quickly to everything we try." Admiral Chen's smile widened. "Adaptation is only effective against rational responses, Admiral. Fortunately, we stopped being rational about 2 centuries ago." Before Admiral Zethkar could ask what she meant, the human fleet began its attack. What followed violated every principle of civilized warfare that the Council had established over millennia. The first wave consisted of small, single-pilot ships that the humans called hunter-killers. Each one was piloted by a volunteer who had been psychologically conditioned to find ecstasy in their own destruction. They screamed with joy over the communication channels as they dove directly into swarm formations. Their ships packed with experimental weapons designed to cause maximum psychological trauma. The swarm entities, which had never retreated from any enemy, actually backed away from the approaching human ships. The biomechanical creatures seemed confused by opponents who celebrated their own deaths and fought with tactics that made no strategic sense. "What are they doing?" Admiral Zethkar demanded, watching human pilots ram their ships directly into swarm entities while laughing maniacally. "They're committing suicide." "No," his tactical officer said quietly. "They're winning." The hunter-killer pilots were indeed dying, but their deaths served a purpose. Each ship was loaded with Dr. Vasquez's biological weapons or engineered viruses that attacked the swarm's adaptive capabilities from within. Every time a swarm entity tried to adapt to the new threats, the viruses rewrote their genetic codes to make adaptation impossible. The second wave was even more disturbing. The larger human ships began broadcasting what they called psychological warfare frequencies, or sounds specifically designed to induce madness in organic minds. The swarm entities, which had collective intelligence networks, suddenly found their coordination breaking down as their biomechanical brains struggled to process sensory input that triggered primordial fears they didn't know they possessed. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Zethkar. "The swarm has never shown fear before." Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication channel, distorted by the screaming of what sounded like 1,000 dying voices. "Fear is just pattern recognition applied to survival scenarios, Admiral. We've spent 2 centuries learning how to weaponize every emotion that evolution ever produced." The DNS Wendigo moved closer to the planet's surface, its weapon systems charging with an energy signature that made the Corvani sensors emit warning alerts. The ship itself seemed alive, its hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that resembled a heartbeat. When it fired its main guns, the beams didn't just destroy swarm entities, they infected them. Admiral Zethkar watched in horrified fascination as swarm bioconstructs began turning on each other, their adaptive programming corrupted by human cyber weapons that made adaptation itself a fatal weakness. The collective intelligence that had made the swarm unstoppable became a liability as infected entities spread madness through their shared consciousness. "How is this possible?" he asked over the open channel. "Simple," Admiral Chen replied, her ship now surrounded by a cloud of smaller vessels that moved like a school of predatory fish. "The swarm adapts to logical threats, but we don't fight logically. We fight like the apex predators our evolution made us, using tools our isolation allowed us to perfect." The third wave of the human attack defied all tactical comprehension. Ships that should have been providing fire support instead began broadcasting what the humans called reality distortion fields. Energy patterns that made swarm entities question their own existence. Biomechanical creatures that had consumed entire star systems suddenly became paralyzed by existential uncertainty. "Admiral Chen," Admiral Zethkar called out, "some of your weapons are affecting my crew as well. My people are reporting nightmares and panic attacks just from observing your attacks." "Warning noted," Admiral Chen replied without apparent concern. "I suggest your people avoid looking directly at our operations. We optimize these weapons for maximum psychological impact, not surgical precision." The battle continued for 6 hours, but it was unlike any conflict in recorded galactic history. The humans didn't just fight the swarm aroused, they horrified it. Ships with names like Nightmare and Banshee deployed weapons that turned the swarm's greatest strengths into weaknesses. The most disturbing moment came when a group of swarm entities actually tried to retreat. The biomechanical creatures, which had never shown self-preservation instincts before, began fleeing toward the outer system. But the human ships pursued them with what could only be described as sadistic pleasure. "Let some of them escape," Admiral Chen ordered over the tactical frequency. "We want them to carry reports back to the main swarm. Terror is only effective if it spreads." Admiral Zethkar realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just fighting to save Thekvala. They were conducting a psychological warfare experiment on a galactic scale. Every weapon they used was designed not just to kill, but to traumatize. Every tactic was calculated to create stories that would spread fear throughout the swarm's collective consciousness. As the last swarm entities fled the system, Admiral Chen's ship approached the Corvani defense platform. The human admiral appeared on the communication screen again, her mechanical components glowing with residual heat from the battle. "Thekval is secure, Admiral Zethkar," she announced. "The swarm entities will report this defeat to their collective, and the psychological impact will spread throughout their network. They'll become hesitant to attack other worlds, buying the galaxy time." "At what cost?" Admiral Zethkar asked. "Your people fought like monsters?" Admiral Chen suggested with that predatory smile. "Yes, we did. That's what you asked for when you sent that distress signal. You begged the galaxy for help, and the galaxy's monsters answered." Admiral Zethkar looked at his tactical display, which showed swarm biological matter still writhing on the planet's surface, but now it writhed in apparent agony, infected with human weapons that turned adaptation into a form of slow suicide. "What have you become in those 2 centuries of isolation?" he asked quietly. Admiral Chen's expression became thoughtful. "We became what we always had the potential to be, Admiral. The Council tried to civilize us, to make us fight cleanly and die politely. But evolution doesn't create apex predators to be civilized. It creates them to survive." The human fleet began moving toward the outer system, leaving behind monitoring stations that looked more like monuments to applied terror than functional equipment. Their ships disappeared one by one into hyperspace, bound for other swarm incursions throughout the galaxy. Admiral Zethkar stood alone on his bridge, watching the tactical displays show a swarm in retreat for the first time in recorded history. His homeworld was saved, but at a cost he was only beginning to understand. The humans had answered the galaxy's desperate plea for help, but in doing so, they had revealed what 2 centuries of isolation and unrestricted military development had created. The cure might prove more terrifying than the disease. In the depths of space, Admiral Chen reviewed the battle reports with satisfaction. The swarm had been defeated, but more importantly, they had been traumatized. Fear would spread through their collective consciousness like a virus, making them hesitant to attack other worlds. But she also knew that the Council species who had begged for help were now seeing the true face of humanity for the calm. Senator Lyriel of the Etherian Republic stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, her translucent skin flickering with patterns of distress that hadn't been seen since the early days of the swarm crisis. Around her, representatives from 12 species struggled to process reports that challenged everything they thought they understood about warfare, morality, and the nature of salvation itself. "The Thekval system is secure," she announced, her voice carrying the harmonics of barely controlled panic. "The swarm entities have withdrawn completely. But the cost?" She paused, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to deep purple. "The cost may be higher than we anticipated." Chancellor Marin of the Astari Collective leaned forward in her chair, golden feathers now permanently gray from stress. "Explain, Senator. The humans defeated the swarm. Isn't that what we wanted?" "Yes and no," Senator Lyriel replied, activating the main holographic display. "They defeated the swarm, but their methods have created complications." The display showed recordings from the Battle of Thekval, footage that had been classified at the highest levels to prevent panic throughout the Council systems. Representatives watched in horrified silence as human ships deployed weapons that seemed designed by minds that had abandoned all concepts of mercy or restraint. The psychological impact on swarm entities is confirmed, Admiral Zethkar reported via subspace communication from his still-recovering fleet. "Our xenobiologists have never seen anything like it. The swarm's collective consciousness appears to be experiencing what can only be described as species-wide trauma. They're avoiding systems where humans might be present." "Then the strategy worked," declared the Graxian delegate, his rocky features showing cautious optimism. "The swarm is retreating. We have breathing room to rebuild our defenses." "At what cost?" Senator Lyriel demanded, changing the display to show medical reports from Corvani survivors. 40% of our people who witnessed the human attack are experiencing symptoms ranging from severe anxiety to complete psychological breakdown. The humans didn't just traumatize the swarma, they traumatized everyone who observed their tactics. The chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed this information. The humans had indeed saved the Corvani homeworld, but their methods of salvation raised disturbing questions about the nature of their allies. "There's more," Senator Lyriel continued grimly. We've received reports from 17 other systems where human fleets have engaged swarm forces. In every case, they've achieved victory through tactics that violate every principle of civilized warfare we've established. She activated a series of tactical reports, each one more disturbing than the last. Human ships that used biological weapons to turn swarm entities into cannibalistic predators. Psychological warfare systems that induced madness in any organic mind within their range. AI constructs that seemed to take pleasure in the suffering they caused. The humans call it Project Nightmare, Admiral Zethkar added. According to their Admiral Chen, they've spent 2 centuries developing weapons specifically designed to break enemies psychologically, rather than simply destroy them physically. Chancellor Marin stood up, her movements sharp with agitation. Are you suggesting we should have refused their help? Should we have allowed the swarm to consume everything while maintaining our moral superiority? I'm suggesting, Senator Lyriel replied carefully, that we may have traded one existential threat for another. The humans aren't just fighting to defend the galaxy. They're conducting experiments. They're testing weapons that turn fear itself into a battlefield tool. The Arthrani delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly, indicating extreme agitation. Through his translator, his concerns emerged in stilted but clear terms. Human weapons adapt to fear responses, not designed for defeating enemies, designed for studying terror. We are laboratory subjects now. This observation sent a chill through the chamber. If the Arthrani were correct, the humans weren't just using the swarm crisis as an opportunity to prove their worth. They were using it as a testing ground for weapons of mass psychological destruction. We need to see the data from their other operations, Chancellor Marin decided. If they're conducting experiments, we need to understand what they're learning and why. The reports that arrived over the next several days painted a picture that was both encouraging and terrifying. Human fleets had indeed achieved unprecedented success against swarm forces, but their methods defied every principle of ethical warfare. At the Helix Nebula system, human ships had deployed what they called reality distortion weaponry, energy fields that made swarm entities question their own existence until they became paralyzed by existential uncertainty. The weapons worked perfectly, but 3 Council observer ships in the area reported that their crews were now unable to sleep without medication and required constant psychological counseling. In the Outer Rim territories, a human fleet had used biological agents that corrupted the swarm's adaptive capabilities, turning their greatest strength into a fatal weakness. But the same agents had begun showing signs of self-directed evolution, creating hybrid organisms that hunted both swarm entities and any other organic life they encountered. Most disturbing was the report from the Astari border worlds, where human forces had deployed soldiers who had been psychologically conditioned to find pleasure in their own deaths. These Banshee Protocol operatives fought with suicidal courage that broke swarm tactical algorithms. But their presence on the battlefield had driven several Council military units to desert, rather than fight alongside such obviously disturbed allies. They're not just winning battles, Dr. Than observed during a classified briefing. They're rewriting the psychological landscape of warfare itself. Every engagement creates new trauma patterns that spread through both enemy and allied forces. Senator Lyriel reviewed the medical reports with growing alarm. We're seeing a 43% increase in psychological disorders among Council military personnel who have worked with human forces. Sleep disorders, anxiety, depression, and in some cases, complete dissociative episodes. But the alternative was extinction, Chancellor Marin pointed out. The swarm would have consumed everything. At least now we have a chance to survive and rebuild. Do we? Senator Lyriel challenged. Or have we simply traded one form of consumption for another? The humans aren't just defeating our enemies, They're changing what it means to be at war. Their weapons don't just kill, they infect minds with concepts that organic psychology was never meant to process. The debate was interrupted by an emergency alert from the Council's deep space monitoring stations. Admiral Chen's flagship had appeared at the edge of the system, requesting permission to dock and address the Council directly. Should we allow it? Chancellor Marin asked. Do we have a choice? Senator Lyriel replied. They've proven they can appear anywhere they want, whenever they want. At least if we invite them in, we maintain the illusion of having some control over the situation. Admiral Chen arrived at the Council chambers 12 hours later, accompanied by a small escort of what appeared to be human officers. but close examination revealed that several of her companions had modifications that pushed the boundaries of what could be considered human. Cybernetic implants, genetic alterations, and psychological conditioning had created beings that existed somewhere between human and something else entirely. Honored representatives, Admiral Chen began, her mechanical arm moving with inhuman precision as she gestured to the tactical displays. I understand you have concerns about our methods. Concerns is putting it mildly, Senator Lyriel replied. Your weapons are causing psychological trauma in our own forces. Your tactics violate every principle of civilized warfare, and your soldiers appear to have been deliberately driven insane. Admiral Chen smiled, the expression somehow more disturbing than any scowl could have been. Senator Lyriel, you asked monsters for help. Did you expect us to fight like angels? We expected you to fight like civilized beings, Chancellor Marin interjected. Civilization is a luxury, Admiral Chen replied calmly. When extinction threatens, you use whatever tools are necessary for survival. We've simply had 2 centuries to develop tools that prioritize effectiveness over comfort. Your biological weapons are evolving beyond your control, the Arthrani delegate pointed out. Some have begun hunting organic life indiscriminately. Growing pains, Admiral Chen acknowledged. We'll contain the more problematic variants once the swarm threat is neutralized. And if you can't? Senator Lyriel demanded. Admiral Chen's expression became thoughtful. Then we'll adapt. That's what apex predators do, Senator. We evolve to meet new challenges. The chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed the implications of her words. The humans weren't just fighting to save the galaxy. They were using the crisis to push their own evolution in directions that organic minds might not be equipped to understand. What do you want from us? Chancellor Marin asked finally. Nothing, Admiral Chen replied. You asked for help and we provided it. The swarm is retreating. Your worlds are safe. Whether you approve of our methods is irrelevant. And after the swarm is defeated? Admiral Chen's smile returned. After the swarm is defeated, you'll have to live with the knowledge that your salvation came from the monsters you tried to quarantine. You'll have to decide whether you're grateful or terrified. 3 months after the Battle of Thekval, the Galactic Council's emergency session was interrupted by reports that would reshape the political landscape of known space forever. Senator Lyriel stood before the assembled representatives, her translucent skin now permanently dimmed with stress patterns that had become her normal appearance. The Void Swarm has ceased all aggressive operations, she announced. Our long-range sensors show massive formations retreating beyond the galactic rim. For the first time in our recorded history, they appear to be afraid. The chamber should have erupted in celebration. Instead, it remained eerily quiet. Every representative understood that victory had come with costs that were still being calculated. Chancellor Marin activated the main display, showing tactical maps of the galaxy. Where red zones had once marked swarm-consumed territories, new markers now appeared in unsettling black. These zones marked areas where human fleets operated and, increasingly, where other species feared to travel. The humans have established what they call protection protocols around 17 major systems, Chancellor Marin reported. Their ships patrol constantly, using detection methods we don't understand and weapons that continue to evolve without our input or oversight. Admiral Zethkar's image appeared on the communication screen, his blue uniform now bearing scars from battles that had left psychological marks deeper than physical ones. Honored Council, I've just returned from a diplomatic mission to the human quarantine zone. What I found there... He paused, his normally steady voice trembling slightly. The humans have changed. Not just their technology or their tactics. They've changed themselves. Explain, Senator Lyriel demanded, though her tone suggested she dreaded the answer. Their worlds are unlike anything in our databases. Cities that exist partially in dimensions we can't perceive. Factories that produce weapons by breeding them rather than building them. And the humans themselves. Admiral Zethkar's image flickered as his communication array struggled with interference that seemed to come from his own memories. Many of them are no longer entirely organic. They've modified themselves for warfare on levels that challenge the definition of sentient life. The Arthrani delegate's mandibles clicked in a pattern that his translator couldn't process. After several attempts, the machine finally produced words. Fear weapons. Spreading. Not contained to battlefields. Council worlds reporting. Psychological contamination. Dreams of human ships. Nightmares that infect others. This revelation sent a chill through the assembled representatives. The humans hadn't just deployed psychological weapons against the swarma. They had created forms of mental warfare that spread like viruses through organic consciousness. How many of our people are affected? Chancellor Marin asked. Dr. Than consulted his data tablet with hands that shook noticeably. Conservative estimates suggest 17% of the council population has experienced some form of human-induced psychological effect. Sleep disorders, anxiety, depression, and in severe cases, what our psychiatrists are calling existential cascade failures, warrant complete breakdowns in an individual's ability to process reality. The humans call it cognitive overflow, Admiral Zethkar added grimly. Their weapons are designed to inject concepts into organic minds that those minds cannot properly process. The psychological damage spreads through social contact, creating expanding zones of mental instability. Senator Lyriel stood up, her bioluminescent patterns now cycling through colors that indicated species-level distress. We need to discuss the possibility of reimposing quarantine restrictions on human space. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the chamber understood the implications of her suggestion and the impossibility of enforcing it. With what authority? Chancellor Marin asked quietly. With what force? The humans have demonstrated capabilities that exceed our understanding. Their fleets move through space using methods our physicists can't explain. Their weapons evolve faster than our scientists can study them. As if summoned by their discussion, the chamber's communication systems activated without anyone initiating contact. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen, her mechanical components now more extensive than before. Behind her, the bridge of her flagship hummed with energy signatures that made the Council's sensors emit warning alerts. Honored representatives, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with the fear centers of organic brains. I understand you're discussing our future relationship. Admiral Chen, Senator Lyriel said, fighting to keep her voice steady. We appreciate your assistance during the swarm crisis, but we need to establish protocols for controlling us. Admiral Chen interrupted, her predatory smile now enhanced with dental modifications that served no function except intimidation. Senator, you still don't understand. You can't control apex predators. You can only hope they decide your survival aligns with their interests. Chancellor Marin leaned forward. Are you threatening the Council? I'm clarifying our position, Admiral Chen replied. The galaxy is safe from the swarm because we made it safe. That protection continues because we choose to provide it. But protection and control are different concepts. The display behind Admiral Chen showed real-time tactical information from across the galaxy. Human ships were positioned at strategic points throughout Council space, their dark hulls barely visible against the star fields. It was clear that humanity had established a military presence that encompassed every major trade route, every critical system, every center of galactic civilization. You've militarized the entire galaxy, Admiral Zethkar observed. We've secured it, Admiral Chen corrected. The difference is perspective. From our viewpoint, we're protecting valuable assets from future threats. From yours, we're an occupying force. Both perspectives are accurate, Dr. Than found his voice. Your weapons are affecting our people. The psychological contamination is spreading to worlds that never experienced direct combat. Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. Unintended consequences of effective tool deployment. We're working on containment protocols, but psychological weapons are inherently difficult to control once released. Think of it as evolutionary pressure. Species that survive the cognitive effects will be stronger. Those that don't, she shrugged with mechanical precision. You're conducting experiments on entire populations, Senator Lyriel accused. We're accelerating natural selection, Admiral Chen replied calmly. Civilization has made organic species soft, unprepared for real threats. Our weapons weed out individuals whose minds can't adapt to new forms of warfare. It's a public service. The casual discussion of species-wide psychological experimentation would have been unthinkable before the swarm crisis. Now it was simply another factor in the galaxy's new political reality. What do you want from us? Chancellor Marin asked, echoing the question she had posed months earlier with entirely different implications. Acknowledgement, Admiral Chen said. Recognition that the quarantine you imposed 2 centuries ago has ended, not because you chose to end it, but because we chose to ignore it. The galaxy now operates under human protection, and protection implies authority. She gestured to tactical displays showing swarm formations fleeing toward distant galaxies. The entities you couldn't defeat are now so terrified of human space that they're abandoning this galaxy entirely. But terror is only effective if it's maintained. Our patrols will continue. Our weapons will evolve, and your species will adapt to the new reality or be replaced by those that can. And if we refuse? Senator Lyriel asked, though her question sounded more like a formality than a real challenge. Admiral Chen's expression became thoughtful. Refusal implies choice, Senator. What choices do you think you have? The answer was delivered through the chamber's sensor systems, which detected energy signatures from human ships positioned throughout the system. The Council's own defense fleet, such as it was, couldn't match even a single human vessel, let alone the armada that had materialized around their space. I see, Chancellor Marin said quietly. I hope you do. Admiral Chen replied. The galaxy begged for salvation from its monsters. We provided that salvation by becoming something worse than the original threat. Now you live in a universe where humanity serves as both protector and predator, where survival depends on our continued interest in your welfare. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in silence. Outside, long-range sensors continued tracking swarm formations as they fled toward other galaxies, seeking spaces where human weapons couldn't reach them. What have we done? Senator Lyriel whispered. We survived, Chancellor Marin replied. The question now is whether survival was worth the price. In the months that followed, the galaxy settled into its new reality. Trade routes operated under human protection, worlds developed under human oversight, and gradually, stories began spreading about things worse than the swarm of things that fled from human space carrying tales of weapons that infected minds and ships that moved through dimensions of pure terror.